The desert is not silent. Not really. At night, the wind drags across the sand like a long breath, and the rocks hum with a low, hollow echo. I remember the first time I camped along a forgotten trail. No towns of miles, no headlights on the horizon, just me, the stars, and a lantern burning weak against the endless dark. The air felt different there, heavier, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Coyotes cried far off, but underneath their voices was something deeper, a growl that carried through the stones. I told myself it was only the wind, though my skin prickled each time it came closer. By midnight, I realized I wasn't alone on that trail. I could hear footsteps pacing the edge of the light, circling, patient, waiting for me to make a sound. My hand hovered over the zip of the tent, but I never should have opened it. That's when I saw it. The moon hung swollen over the desert. Its light spread pale and silver across the sand, soft enough to burn my eyes. I could feel the coolness of the night against my skin, though the air still carried the faint heat of the day. Each step I took sank slightly into the sand, leaving prints I'd soon forget, or so I thought. The desert was alive with small noises, the rustle of dry grass, the brush of wind over stone, but mostly it was silence. Coyotes called somewhere in the distance, long, wailing cries that echoed between the dunes. One sound broke the pattern, heavier, closer. I froze, my boots pressing into sand. Footprints appeared beside mine, too large, too wide, not human. I swallowed, tasting grit in my mouth, and stepped forward. The prints moved with me. I stopped. They did not. A shiver ran up my spine. The wind shifted. Dry grain scraped against my ankles, whispering. I turned slowly, half expecting shadows to shift. Nothing moved, but I felt eyes on me. The moonlight glinted off something in the distance. A shimmer of fur? A reflection? I could not tell. I tried to calm my breathing. The sand crunched underfoot, louder than it should have been. The desert held its own, patient and vast, indifferent, yet the footprints beside mine refused to vanish. The coyotes' cries grew nearer, closer, layered, uneven. One howl stretched and cracked in a way that made my stomach twist. It was not a coyote. I quickened my pace, heart thrumming like a drum in my chest. Every time I thought I saw a shadow, it slipped away before I could focus. The sand beneath me shifted differently. Heavier depressions, dragging marks, as if something large had moved through just ahead. I thought about turning back, but the path behind me looked endless, silver, and empty, swallowed by the night. Every instinct screamed to run. Every step forward was slow, deliberate, soaked in tension. Then I heard it, a soft, dragging step, separate from mine. Close, but not matching my rhythm. Closer still. I stopped again. The footprints paused too. A whisper of wind stirred the sand. It tickled my ankles. I could almost imagine the weight of something leaning down near me. A pause, then a soft scrape. I kept walking, faster this time. The moonlight painted shadows on the dunes, stretching them long and thin. Each crest I crossed seemed taller than the last, hiding something just beyond sight. I stumbled on a ridge and looked back. My prints were there. The other prints, they were closer. No hesitation in their path. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a coyote, a boulder, something mundane. But I smelled it then, the musky scent of wet fur, heavy and raw, lingering even in the dry desert air. It hung in my nostrils like a warning. The wind whispered again. Something brushed against the back of my neck. Barely there, fleeting. I spun. Nothing. Only moonlight and sand. I wanted to run. My legs shook as I forced them to move. The desert stretched endlessly, silver and quiet, but the prints stayed. They circled me once, slow and deliberate, before fading into the dunes ahead. I paused, listening. The coyotes were silent now. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The sand shifted where the footprints had been, smooth, almost polished by unseen weight. And then, faintly, a sound I will never forget. A low, dragging exhale, wet, heavy, coming from just beyond the reach of the moonlight. I did not stop to see it. I ran. The desert swallowed my footsteps. The moon watching, silver and indifferent. The night had deepened, folding the desert into a velvet black. I crouched beside the small, clearing I'd chosen for camp. The rocks were warm from the day, rough beneath my fingers. I struck a match. The flame flickered, weak and golden. I coaxed it higher until sparks danced on the dry kindling. Then it went out. No wind, no movement, just silence. I tried again. The flame caught. Warmth curled around my hands. Shadows stretched across the sand in slow, lazy fingers. And then it snuffed. A subtle exhale, like breath brushing the flame away. I froze, listening. The desert held only itself. I crouched lower, holding my hands close to the fire. The smell of dry sage and smoke filled my nose. But underneath, something damp and musky lingered, subtle wrong. I lit it once more. Flames licked upward, shaking in defiance. And then movement, a glimmer of eyes reflected just beyond the circle of light, blinking, watching, patient. I told myself it was a coyote. But coyote eyes aren't still. They don't hold curiosity like this. They don't weigh you. I fed the fire, my hands trembling. Each stick I added caught, flared, then dimmed again. It was like the darkness itself was pressing in, swallowing each spark. I noticed the smell again. Wet fur, damp earth, something alive. It lingered in the shadows, teasing the edges of my vision. I tried to call out, but the words stuck in my throat. I felt small, foolish, alone. A branch snapped behind me, or maybe a rock shifted. Something moved. A shadow passed over the sand, heavier than any coyote should be, closer than it should be. The fire sputtered, sending tiny embers into the air. For a brief second, I saw it. A shape crouched, still, staring from the darkness, eyes shining with faint green gold light. It didn't move. It waited. I held my breath, listening to the desert hum around me. The wind had softened. The night felt suspended. I lit the fire again, faster now. Smoke curled upward, carrying the smell of dry wood and fear. The flames reached higher, desperate, and still the eyes lingered. They blinked slowly, almost mocking, just beyond my reach. The night pressed in quiet and patient. I backed up, kicking sand onto flames. The fire dimmed instantly, black curling smoke swallowing the light. The desert's hush returned. Only the distant call of a coyote broke the silence. But it sounded wrong, stretched, cracked. I could feel it then, the weight of something circling. Soft footsteps, or the lack of them, brushed the edges of the clearing. A breath in the shadows. A rustle in the brush. Something that was watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. I tried to sleep. The sand was hard. My back ached. But every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the eyes blinking, glowing, unblinking, patient. I imagined them slipping closer with every shallow breath. The fire wouldn't hold. It wouldn't stay. I rose before dawn, leaving the stones where I had tried to tame the flames. The ashes lay cold, scattered, disturbed as if something had walked through, and in the soft light of early morning, I thought I saw a prince, large, too large, disappearing into the brush. I walked quickly, listening for the desert to call again, but the night had left its mark. Even the wind felt hesitant, careful. The memory of those eyes stayed with me, blinking, unyielding, watching me leave, and I knew I would hear them again. The desert air grew colder as I climbed toward the ridge. Shadows stretched long beneath the rising moon, turning every rock into a jagged silhouette. The sand crunched beneath my boots, each step sending small clouds drifting into the night. The wind carried a new sound, low, distant, and jagged. A howl. It cut across the mountains like a shard of ice. Not the smooth cry of a coyote, but something broken, something that shook the rocks beneath my feet, vibrating through my chest. I paused, listening. The echoes bounced, curling between canyons, carrying a weight that made my stomach tighten. My fingers itched to cover my ears, but I kept them at my sides, tense. Step by careful step, I climbed. The path narrowed, rocks scraping against my palms as I steadied myself. The howl returned, closer now, layered with other subtle noises, something moving just beyond the reach of sight. I reached the top of the ridge. The desert spread out beneath me, silver by moonlight, calm and empty. but the silence that followed the howl was heavier than the sound itself. Then I saw them, scratches etched into the stone, deep, long, deliberate, claw marks. They weren't fresh, not exactly, but they weren't faded either. They were preserved, sharp against the gray, as if the desert refused to let time claim them. I traced one with a finger, feeling the grooves cut into the rock, rough, worn smooth in places. The shape was wrong, too long, too wide, too sharp. A pattern repeated down the ridge, vanishing into shadow. A gust of wind whispered over the stone. It carried a faint tang of fur, musky and damp. The scent lingered, clinging to my clothes, my hair. I thought about turning back. I thought about the safety of the lowlands, the warmth of a fire that wouldn't die. But something held me. Curiosity or foolishness, or both. The howl came again. Closer, sharper. Not one voice now, but layered, breathing, straining, calling. It seemed to circle me, rising and falling like a tide, dragging the rocks with it. I knelt, pressing my palm to the stone. I could feel the vibrations, the pulse of something alive, something enormous. The moonlight shifted. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision. I turned. Nothing. Yet I felt it. Weight pressing against the edge of perception. A dry rock crumbled beneath my foot. The sound echoed, tiny, fragile. The howl answered. Closer. The echo carried across the ridge, sharper this time, jagged and raw. I stumbled backward, my boot catching a stone, heart hammering, breath shallow. Every instinct screamed to run. But I couldn't tear my eyes from the marks. They told a story older than me, older than the desert, a presence that had walked these ridges long before I arrived. Silent witnesses, carved in stone. The wind shifted again. It tugged at my hair, brushing against my neck. I smelled the faint musk again, stronger now, closer, watching, waiting. I wanted to move, to leave, to descend into the quiet safety below. But the marks drew me forward. Step by slow step, I traced the clawed path along the ridge. The howl came again, long and broken. It rose and fell, filling the night. My boots sank into the sand at the ridge's edge. Below me, the desert stretched empty, yet the vibration in my chest, the weight in the air, told me I was not alone. A shadow moved across the stone, pale in the moonlight, too tall to be a man, too fluid to be an animal. I blinked. It was gone. I pressed my hands over my ears. But the howl continued. It carried something with it, a promise or a warning or a question I could not answer. I sank to the ground, chest heaving, eyes tracing the claw marks down the slope. The ridge held its silence again. Waiting, the desert breathed around me, calm and indifferent, but the claw marks remained. The echoes remained, and somewhere, hidden, the presence lingered. I did not stay long. I slid down the ridge carefully, tracing the path back. The desert seemed quieter now, the wind gentler. But the howl followed me, carried in my ears, in my chest, in my bones. I thought I had left it behind, but I knew. As I sank in the sand at the foot of the ridge, I had only glimpsed the beginning. The desert held secrets, silent, jagged, waiting, and I had walked right into one. The road stretched empty before me, fading into darkness. The desert pressed close, silent and wide. The moon hung pale, brushing everything in silver. I saw the gas station before I reached it, a lonely structure, peeling paint, rust streaks running down the walls like dried tears. The pumps were cracked, glass shattered, metal bent by time, or something else. I stepped closer. The gravel crunched beneath my boots, harsh and dry. A cold wind stirred, carrying the faint smell of oil and something older, something rotten, like fur left in the sun. I pushed the door open. The hinges groaned. Inside, dust lay thick, settled into every corner like snow. Cans rattled on the shelves, not from the wind, from themselves, nudged by unseen hands. I froze. The quiet pressed against my ears, soft but heavy. A set of paw prints trailed across the counter, small, human-like pads mixed with longer claws. They led through the dust toward the back of the store. I followed them slowly. The air smelled warmer back there, heavier, tinged with dampness. Something shifted in the shadows. I thought I saw the curve of a shoulder, or maybe a hunch of fur. The wind outside rattled the broken glass. I turned. The pump swayed slightly, though the air was still. The moonlight touched the shattered glass, reflecting shards into corners. For a moment, I thought I saw movement in them, eyes flickering, then gone. I stepped over more paw prints. They stopped abruptly at the back wall. No door, no passage, just a smear in the dust. I bent to touch it. Cold, smooth, not human. The hairs on my arms prickled. I wanted to back away, to flee, but my feet stayed rooted. The desert wind whispered through the broken windows. I could hear the faint scrape of claws across metal. Or was it stone? Something watched, patient, just beyond the light. I glanced at the counter. A small bell had once hung there, now missing. I imagined it ringing softly. A warning, a greeting, but no sound came. I caught the faint smell again. Wet fur, musky and damp, layering with the dust and oil. It lingered at my throat, heavy. I swallowed, tasting grit. The shadows seemed to deepen, lengthen, brushing my ankles like invisible fingers. I thought I heard soft footsteps behind me. But when I turned, the room lay still. Only dust drifted in a pale shaft of moonlight. Outside, the desert wind shifted. A coyote's cry broke the silence, distant but harsh. Closer? I couldn't tell. The paw prints didn't move. But I felt their presence, patient, still, like they were waiting for me to leave. I stepped back toward the door. The glass cut my reflection into jagged pieces. For a moment, I thought one of those shards moved differently than the others. Blinked. I forced myself to look away. I left quickly. The gravel crunched underfoot, the wind pushing at me. The pumps loomed like silent sentinels. The station itself seemed to breathe, exhaled dust and shadow and waves. I glanced back once. The paw prints had disappeared. Or had I imagined them? I kept walking. The road ahead stretched silver under the moon. The desert returned to its quiet patience. But the smell lingered. The weight lingered. And somewhere, just behind the edge of the shattered glass, something waited. I didn't stop to look again. The night was vast. The road was mine for now. But I knew it wouldn't be alone. The sky darkened suddenly. The sun swallowed by a wall of brown. The desert dissolved around me. Sand whipped across my face, stinging my eyes, filling my mouth. I pressed my scarf tighter. The trail disappeared. Everything became motion, static chaos. My boots sank with each step. The wind howled, dragging the world into blur. And then I saw it, a shape tall and bent, moving on all fours, faster than the storm itself. Its limbs struck the sand with sharp, fluid precision. It twisted, darted, vanished behind swirling clouds of dust. I froze, heart hammering. Sand scoured my skin, filling my ears. My breath came in ragged gasps. And still I could feel it, watching, waiting. I tried to follow, eyes squinting against the fury. The outline shimmered, bending in and out of the storm. Closer now, a blur of movement, bending impossible angles. Then it vanished entirely. I blinked. Silence returned, heavy and thick. The wind calmed, leaving only drifting grains. The desert lay empty, pale and indifferent beneath the moonlight. But the sand bore its story. Claw marks, deep and jagged, cut into the dunes. Wide, irregular, impossible for any ordinary animal. They sliced through the surface, tracing a path that ended nowhere. I knelt beside them, tracing the grooves with a trembling finger. Rough, sharp, raw. The grain sifted through my hands, dry, almost brittle. I felt the weight of whatever had made them pressing against my chest. The scent followed me, musky, damp, and raw. It clung to the dust, to the air, to my hair. I could feel it crawling along the back of my neck, settling in my clothes. A small movement caught my eye. A shadow flickered along the edge of the ridge. No shape, just a suggestion of presence. I imagined limbs bending in impossible angles, a crouched form stretching, watching. The storm's remnants swirled around me, whispers of sand brushing my ankles, scratching my boots. I could hear soft thuds, not matching my own steps. Something paced, circling, testing, patient. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed to flee, but my legs felt heavy. The desert had already claimed them. The moon returned, soft and pale. The marks in the sand shone silver in its light. I followed them cautiously, step by careful step. They led into emptiness. A rhythm repeated itself. A cadence. I paused. My chest heaved. The wind carried a low growl, deep and rolling, vibrating through the sand. It wasn't a coyote, not a wolf. Something older, larger, patient. I thought I saw movement again. A bend, a flicker just at the edge of my vision. The shape crouched, low, hunched impossibly long. Then it was gone. I shivered, pressing my hands to my legs. The desert was calm now, still, deceptively so. I traced the claw marks once more. They ended abruptly, fading into smooth sand. But the air felt heavy. A presence lingered, unseen but undeniable. I stumbled forward. Every nerve screamed. Every step carried the memory of that form. I could feel it crouched in the dunes behind me, stalking, pacing, watching. The storm left traces in the air, whispers, scratches, a hint of fur. The moonlight illuminated nothing but sand and rocks. I called out once. My voice was swallowed immediately, carried away with the drifting grains. The desert returned to its silence, but the sand remained marked. The claws, the prints, the reminder that something had passed, and had been faster, stronger, sharper than any natural force. I did not linger. I moved quickly, boots scraping against the rough terrain. The desert seemed endless, but I kept to the faint trail I remembered. Every step carried the memory of the shape, of the storm, of the low, rolling growl in the night. By the time I stopped, the dunes were quiet. The moon hung pale above, indifferent, but the scent lingered, musky, damp, alive, and I knew it would not leave me. The marks in the sand remained, deep, jagged, impossible to erase. I followed them in my mind, knowing that somewhere the shape waited, and I had seen only the beginning. The road stretched empty beneath a dark sky. My headlights cut through the desert, thin beams across sand and scrub. Then the engine shuddered. A cough, a long, dying groan. I pressed the pedal again. Nothing. The car shivered and went silent. The desert closed in. No wind, no sound, just the hum of my own panicked breathing. I stepped out. The gravel crunched underfoot, loud in the emptiness. The air smelled of hot metal, of oil, of dry dust. And then something else. Footsteps, soft pacing, not human, not predictable. I froze, listening. The headlights flickered. A flash of movement for catching the light. A glint of eyes, too wide, too sharp, grinning in a way no animal should. I blinked. Nothing. I walked around the car, tried to peer into the shadows. The desert stretched pale and empty. The wind carried only sand. And yet, I could feel it. The presence circling, patient. A weight in the darkness just beyond the reach of the light. I sat back inside, locking the doors. The air was thick, scented faintly of fur musk, and something older, wet earth, blood maybe. I didn't want to think. Every rustle, every scrape of sand against the tires set my nerves on edge. The headlights flickered again. A shadow passed, crouched low, elongated limbs, hunched. It mirrored the contours of the desert, moving faster than a man, smoother than any coyote. I held my breath. I tried to call for help. My phone displayed 0 bars. The hum of the car was my only companion, until the growl came. Low, wet, rolling, vibrating through the tires into my chest. It circled. I could hear it pacing, slow, deliberate, testing me. The shadow moved again in the flickering light, eyes glinting, grin wide. And then it paused, just beyond the reach of illumination, watching. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white, heart hammering. Every instinct screamed to move, to run, to escape. But where could I go? The road stretched endlessly ahead, barren and empty. I watched the desert carefully. A branch shifted in the sand. Something crouched low and bent. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was both. I wanted to look away, to ignore it, but my eyes refused. Something in me knew this wasn't the first time it had watched a stranded traveler, and it wouldn't be the last. I thought about leaving the car, running across the sand. The growl deepened, resonated through the metal, through the floor, through my bones. I stayed. Time stretched. Minutes became hours, or maybe seconds. The desert had no measure here, only presence. And it pressed, patient, silent, circling. I closed my eyes briefly. When I opened them, the headlights caught a flash of her again. A lean shape crouched low, eyes bright and wide. A grin that stretched impossibly far. I tried to start the engine again. It coughed, rattled, died. I pressed my foot to the pedal. Nothing. The growl rose, a wet, rolling sound from the darkness. It paced around me, closer, lingering just beyond the light. I could smell it now, heavy and musky, wet and raw. I could hear it breathing, soft footsteps dragging across sand. Every nerve in my body screamed. I sank back into the seat. The desert stretched pale and quiet beyond the glass. But I knew the eyes were still there, watching, waiting. I didn't sleep. I didn't move. I just listened. And the growl continued, patient, rolling, waiting for me to make a mistake. When dawn began to stain the horizon pale, I started the engine again. It roared to life, trembling under my foot. I drove slowly, cautiously, and I could still feel it behind me, waiting in the shadows of the desert, patient, patient. The neon flickered as I rolled into the motel parking lot. Pink and blue light stuttered against peeling paint and cracked asphalt. The desert stretched silent behind me, empty, patient. I checked in quickly. The manager, a thin man with sunken eyes, handed me a key. He said nothing at first, then murmured, almost under his breath, "Don't open the curtains after midnight." I nodded, unsure if it was advice or a warning. The hallway smelled of old carpet, bleach, and something faintly metallic. My footsteps echoed, soft but hollow, until I reached the room. I shut the door behind me. The lock clicked into place. The walls were faded yellow, peeling in corners. The bedspread smelled faintly of dust and smoke. I tried to settle in, to calm the tight knot in my chest. The desert outside had left its mark on me, restless, tense. I unpacked lightly, placing my bag on the cracked dresser. Midnight came slowly. The hum of the desert outside carried faintly through the thin walls. The moon spilled pale light across the floor, brushing dust motes in slow arcs. Then the scratching began. Soft at first, almost polite. Then louder, deliberate, against the glass of the window. I froze. The desert wind whispered in the night, but it carried no dust, no sand. Only the sound of something outside, heavy, patient. The moonlight shifted. A shadow blocked it. Wide, crouched low, impossible to measure fully through the glass. It didn't move quickly. It lingered, waiting, watching. I told myself it was imagination, a trick of the light, a stray branch against the window. But the scratching continued, methodical, fingernail sharp. I leaned against the bed, breath shallow. The air smelled faintly of dust, of wet fur, and something older, something raw. The shadow didn't disappear when I blinked. It waited. Time slowed. Every minute stretched, thick and sticky. The scratching came again, close to the frame, dragging across the edge of moonlight. I wanted to move, to peek, to see. I didn't. The shadow shifted slightly. Heavy, hunched, limbs bending in ways they shouldn't. Eyes caught the moonlight for a fraction of a second. Green gold, wide, waiting. I buried my face in my hands. Every instinct screamed to run. But the desert had taught me otherwise. Sometimes, running only made them more aware. The scratching paused. Silence pressed in, soft and heavy. And then a breath, low, damp, musky, close to the glass. I could feel its weight against the window, against the room. The air seemed to thrum around me. I imagined its grin, too wide, too sharp, stretching beneath the moonlight. I stayed frozen until the first thin light of dawn. The shadow was gone. The scratching stopped. Even the air seemed lighter. The dust settled into quiet. I opened the curtains slowly, just enough to peer outside. Empty. The desert stretched pale and indifferent. I exhaled, shivered, and knew it would return when darkness fell again. I packed my bag, left the room quietly, avoiding the floorboards that creaked underfoot. The manager didn't ask why I left so early. He just stared, tired eyes narrowing, and whispered, "Some of them never sleep." The parking lot stretched silver beneath the rising sun. The desert behind it waited, patient and silent. And I drove on, carrying the weight of unseen eyes in the back of my mind. Even as the road curved away, the memory of that shadow lingered. Crouched at the glass, waiting. The sun had fallen low, painting the desert in bruised gold and purple. I followed a dry river wash, the stones and sand crunching beneath my boots. The air smelled faintly of dust and sage, but underneath, something older, metallic, sharp. Then I saw it. A mound of bones lay half buried in the sand. Cattle, deer, maybe more. Skulls bleached white under the dying sun, scattered in chaotic order. Some bore long grooves, deep, as if ripped apart by immense jaws. I knelt beside one, brushing sand from the grooves. Rough edges splintered uneven. I could feel the weight of teeth, strength, something ancient. The desert wind shifted. It carried the faint tang of blood, though the bones had long since dried. A crow cawed somewhere in the distance, high above the cliffs. The sound felt sharp, cutting through the stillness of the wash. The shadows lengthened, curling across the bones like fingers. I noticed paw prints weaving between the remains, large, elongated, human-like in shape, but with claws too long, too sharp. They circled the pile and disappeared into the dunes. I stepped carefully, boots crunching against stone and sand. The desert seemed to lean closer, waiting, patient. The wind whispered through the grooves of the bones. It sounded almost like breathing. I crouched to examine another skull. The grooves were deeper here, jagged, deliberate. I imagined the jaws that had created them, enormous, precise, impossible to resist. The memory of the creature from the ridge rose unbidden, crouched and patient, muscles coiled for the hunt. A breeze rattled nearby stones. A cenifer drifted faintly, mingling with dust and iron. Something passed just beyond my vision, crouched, careful, watching. I wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed to run. But curiosity, that quiet, foolish weight, kept me rooted. I traced the paw prints with a finger. They were warm, not warm exactly, but alive in a way that unsettled me. The desert carried silence heavily here, like it had swallowed every other sound. Even my breath seemed too loud. I shifted, and the bones whispered under the wind. I imagined teeth snapping, jaws clamping down, the echoes of something moving through the sand. I could almost feel it pacing nearby, patient, waiting for me to leave. I thought about the river wash in daylight. How harmless it had seemed on the map, how indifferent the desert looked. Yet here, among the bleached remnants, it felt alive. Hungry, watching. I took a step back. The shadow of a dune fell over the pile. For a fleeting moment, the shapes in the sand seemed to stretch, bend, crouch, almost animate. Then the wind shifted again, and they returned to stillness. The scent lingered in my hair, in my clothes, in my lungs. Musky, damp, alive. I felt the presence just beyond sight, patient, crouched low, waiting. I rose slowly, boots scraping the sand. The bones lay silent beneath the pale moonlight now, indifferent, eternal. The paw prints disappeared into the desert, leading nowhere. And yet, the weight of their maker remained. I glanced around, listening to the hush of the desert. Nothing moved, no sound but the whispering wind. Yet I felt it near, watching, patient. I didn't linger. I kept my gaze on the horizon as I walked, tracing the faint outline of the wash in the moonlight. Every step carried the memory of the skulls, the grooves, the scent, the presence. The desert swallowed my footprints as I went, but I knew they would remember me. The weight in the air, the scent, the unseen gaze. They would not forget, and I carried it with me. The night fell slowly, thick and still. I had set up camp on a flat stretch of desert, the sand cold beneath my boots. The moon hung low, pale, painting everything in soft silver. I found an old transistor radio among some rocks near the trail. Its casing was faded, button stiff, antenna bent at a strange angle. I turned the dial. Static, endless, scratching white noise. I adjusted the frequency. More static. The hum filled my ears, buzzing faintly against my skull. Then it came, a low growl, carried through the speaker, rumbling, guttural, too deep for any human throat. I froze. The wind stilled. Even the desert seemed to hold its breath. I turned the radio, listening. The growl rose and fell, closer now, like it was circling. The sand at my feet shifted slightly, a faint whisper against my boots. A voice followed, not human, drawn out, low and wet. It whispered my name, slowly, intentionally, dragging it, stretching it, twisting it. I could feel it vibrating in my chest. I dropped the radio, backing away. The static flared, a high, screaming hiss, then silence. I picked it up again, hands trembling. The voice returned, quieter, more patient, curling around my ears, around my skull. Whisper my name, each syllable a weight, pressing me down. The desert around me was empty. Silver dunes rolled under the moon, silent, patient. But I felt it, watching, waiting, just beyond the reach of the weak circle of light I had made. I set the radio down beside me, trying to focus on the sand, the rocks, the smell of dry earth and sage. Yet beneath that, the faint, musky scent lingered. Wet fur, damp earth, heavy, patient. It clung to the air, to the rocks, to me. The growl returned, low, rolling, vibrating in the sand, in my chest, under the soles of my boots. I imagined the shape, crouched, hunched, eyes glinting in the moonlight, grin impossibly wide. It was out there, just beyond, patient, circling. The voice whispered again, long, dragging, my name, and something else. Something unspoken, heavy. I wanted to run, but the desert was endless, silver and calm, offering no escape. The wind whispered through the dunes, carrying the faint echo of pause, soft but deliberate. The growl layered with the hum of the static, indistinguishable, overlapping, alive. I pressed my hands over my ears, tried to ignore it, but it was everywhere, through the radio, through the air, through my own breath. I could feel it pacing, circling, patient, waiting for me to look. The battery died with a soft click. Silence returned. I exhaled shakily. The desert resumed its calm, indifferent hush. The moon hung low, indifferent and silver. I sat in the quiet, listening. The sand whispered faintly under the wind, but the memory of the growl, of the voice, lingered. The scent of fur, of damp earth, of something patient and alive, lingered. I rose before dawn, left the radio where I had found it. The desert stretched before me, pale and endless. The sun touched the dunes, brushing them gold, but the memory of the night remained. I walked on, boots crunching against sand. The radio's voice haunted me in the quiet of my mind. The desert had spoken. I had heard its call, and I knew I would hear it again. The desert was quiet as the sun began to sink. Shadows stretched long across the road, softening the edges of dunes and rocks. The sky was bruised gold, fading to violet, and the air smelled of hot sand cooling in the evening. I drove slowly along a back road, tires crunching over gravel. The desert seemed empty, indifferent. Then I saw it, something crossing ahead, too tall for a man, too fast for an animal. Its limbs moved with impossible fluidity, bending at angles that made my stomach twist. I slowed, heart hammering. The headlights barely reached it. A blur of shadow, crouched and hunched. It paused, just long enough for my pulse to spike. The dirt shifted where it had passed. Footprints? Claw marks? Something left the earth changed, as if the desert itself had been carved. My engine sputtered, coughing, wheezing, then dying completely. Silence swallowed me. The desert returned to its muted stillness, except it was closer. I could feel it. The air around the car seemed heavier, charged. Soft footsteps, or the echo of them, pressed against the sand. Patient, waiting. I looked around. Nothing visible, but I could smell it. Wet fur, sharp and musky, mingled with the dry desert scent. The shadows seemed to stretch in every direction at once, brushing against my vision. The sun dipped further. The sky deepened to a violet black. The The desert whispered in the silence, carrying the faint scratch of claws along stone and sand. I wanted to move. The engine wouldn't start. The tire spun lightly over gravel with no response. I pressed my hands to the wheel, knuckles white. The shadow shifted at the edge of my headlights. Crouched, watching, patient. I couldn't see the eyes, but I felt them green gold, wide, impossible. I tried the engine again. A single cough, then silence. The shadow moved closer. Well, the air itself seemed to bend in its shape. The dirt remained disturbed, telling me it had passed, lingering, circling. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, indifferent. Behind me, the shifting marks whispered their presence, fading slowly into dusk. I could hear the faintest growl, low, rolling, vibrating under the sand, through the tires, through my chest. I realized there was no escape. The road stretched infinitely. The desert, pale and quiet, held a shadow, patient, unyielding. I stayed in the car, the engine silent, the headlights dim, flickering. The shadow crouched at the edge of vision, impossible to measure, impossible to name. And then it was gone. The dirt shifted, flattened, indistinguishable. No mark remained of its passing, except the weight in the air. The desert was quiet again. I exhaled slowly, still trembling. The sky faded from violet to deep indigo. The air carried the faint musky scent, lingering, patient. I could feel the eyes, unseen, somewhere beyond the curve of the road. I started the engine again. It roared to life, trembling under my foot. I drove slowly, carefully, watching every shadow, every bend. The desert stretched endlessly, indifferent, but I knew the shadow had passed, leaving its mark on the sand, on the air, on me. I could still feel it circling, patient, waiting, and I understood the desert is never empty. Lightning split the sky as I crested a dune. There it stood, a crumbling church, alone. Sand had climbed its walls, licking the broken windows, filling the cracks in the stone. I stepped closer, boots sinking slightly in the soft desert dust. The doors hung crooked, hinges rusted. Inside, the air was cool, dry, and still, smelling faintly of old wood and stone. Pews lay overturned, splintered edges catching moonlight. Claw marks carved deep into the altar. Long, jagged grooves deliberate. A broken stained glass window caught the flash of lightning. Colors splintered across the floor, painting the dust in red and green. And then I saw it. A figure wolf-headed, carved in jagged glass. Its eyes glowed briefly as lightning passed. I couldn't look away. The wind whispered through cracks, rattling the empty pews. I imagined footsteps on the floorboards, shadows shifting at impossible angles. I traced the marks with my fingers, careful not to touch the glass. Rough, deep, impossibly wide. The desert's presence pressing from outside, patient, silent. I stepped back, breath shallow. The air smelled faintly of fur, damp earth, and decay. I wanted to run, but something rooted me to the floor. Something in the carved eyes. Lightning cracked again. The shadows stretched, moving in the corner of my vision. I felt it crouched somewhere, just beyond reach, patient, waiting. I left before the storm ended. The church remained, alone and watchful, its claws, its windows, its silence, all waiting for another traveler. From the highway, the old water tower loomed, its metal legs rusty, swaying slightly in the wind, and atop it a dark shape crouched. It moved like a man, but wrong, too long in the limbs, hunched. Its weight made the metal groan, creaking in protest. I slowed my car, heart hammering. The figure didn't flee. It turned slowly, head tilting. Eyes followed me as I drove, glinting faintly under the moonlight. The desert stretched around the tower, silent, but I felt the weight of its gaze pressing through the windshield. Musky, damp, heavy. I blinked. It remained crouched, patient. No limbs shifted. No movement beyond the slow turn of its head. I drove faster. The metal groaned again, echoing across the dunes. The eyes followed, unblinking, tracking my car until I disappeared over the next rise. I couldn't shake the feeling. It waited there, patient, silent, crouched in the desert night. I stumbled upon a campsite in the dunes. Tents torn open, flaps flapping in a wind that didn't exist. Clothes scattered across sand, fluttering weakly. No people. A trail of footprints led away from the tents. Half human, half something else. Long, clawed impressions in the sand, disappearing into the horizon. I followed cautiously. The desert smelled faintly of sweat, dust, and fur. Shadows shifted around the tents. I crouched, listening. The silence was heavy, oppressive. Even my breath seemed loud in the empty desert. I didn't see movement, but I felt it, circling patient, crouched low. Every step forward carried a memory of what had passed. I left quickly, boots crunching against the sand. Even as the dunes swallowed my footprints, I knew it lingered, waiting, watching. A stray dog appeared along the trail, tail low, whining softly. Its fur was matted, smelled damp and earthy. It followed me, careful at first, then closer, pacing beside my boots. Night came. The dog growled, low and guttural, eyes fixed on the desert beyond the faint firelight. Shadows shifted. Something crouched just beyond vision. Morning revealed the desert empty. The dog was gone. In its place, paw prints, too large, too long for any ordinary canine. They stretched away, vanishing into dunes like a whisper across sand. I shivered, tracing the prints with my foot. The scent lingered musky, damp, alive. The desert watched silently. Patient, I walked on, boots sinking into sand. The memory of the dog, the prints, the eyes beyond, the weight of the desert, followed me. I stopped at a tired roadside gas station. The pumps leaned, rusting, glass cracked. Inside, a man stood behind the counter, thin, hands shaking slightly as he rang up my water. "You'll hear them before you see them," he said quietly. I asked why. He only shook his head, pale and wary. The desert pressed close outside. Sand drifted across broken asphalt. The air smelled of oil, dust, and something musky, waiting. I noticed the paw prints on the floor, long clawed, curving around the pumps. They ended abruptly, leading to the shelves. Nothing there moved, yet I felt it, watching, patient, crouched. I thanked the man and left. The road stretched pale beneath the moonlight. The scent of her lingered, blending with dust and oil. The desert waited. Even as I drove, I could feel eyes following me, patient, watching, and I knew the man's warning was not for me to understand, only to survive. I walked across the desert flats, boots pressing into fine, cool sand. The horizon stretched pale, endless, under a swelling moon. And then I saw them, tracks long clawed, curving circles in the sand, not fresh, not faded, as if the desert refused to swallow them. I traced one slowly with a finger. Rough edges, deep impressions impossibly large. A rhythm echoed beneath my touch. That night, in my tent, I heard it. Soft footsteps pacing outside, dragging across sand. They matched the shape of the tracks. Crouched, patient, watching. The wind carried a faint scent, musky, damp, alive. The desert outside was silent. The footprints circled, waited, vanished just beyond the zipper of my tent. Sleep refused me. I listened, boots scraping, claws pressing lightly against sand, patient. I understood then. The desert did not forget, and neither did the thing that left those tracks. A wooden shack leaned against a cliff, sagging under its own weight. I stepped closer, boots crunching over scattered stones. The air smelled of dry wood, herbs, and something sharp, faintly metallic. Inside, shelves lined the walls. Jars filled with strange herbs, teeth, small bones, each labeled in handwriting jagged and careful. A single note was nailed to the wall. They hunt under the full moon. The room was quiet, too quiet. Every shift of wind made the bottles hum softly. I traced a clawed mark in the dust on the floor. It was fresh. A weight pressed through the walls, patient, crouched low. The air carried a damp, musky scent, faint but unmistakable. I left the shack quickly, boots sinking into sand. The note lingered in my mind, warning heavy and soft. The desert held patience here, and it waited for the moon. The desert was silent, too silent. Even the wind seemed to stop in the hush. Then I heard it, running, fast, four-legged strides tearing across the sand. I looked, nothing. The sound circled me, closer, faster, each stride precise, fluid, echoing across dunes. My heart pounded. The lantern in my hand flickered weakly. I turned. Still nothing. But I could feel it crouched in the shadows, circling, patient, waiting. The sand shifted beneath invisible feet. Soft thuds, sharp scrapes, rhythmical, deliberate. I tried to run. The lantern went out. Darkness pressed against me. The scent of fur and damp earth clung to the air. The running continued, unstoppable, relentless, circling. I sank to the sand, hands over my head. The desert was vast, silent, except for the sound that could not be named. I waited. The running passed, or moved elsewhere, but the memory remained heavy, inescapable, patient. Behind a collapsed barn, I found it. A cage, rusted steel, bent open from the inside. The sand around it bore deep claw marks. I crouched beside it, large, heavy, impossibly strong. Something had forced its way free. The wind shifted. I could smell it, wet, musky, alive. Not human, not quite animal. The desert stretched around the barn, quiet, patient. But I felt its weight. The presence lingered just beyond the rusted bars. Crouched low. I traced the claw marks with a finger. Rough, jagged, deliberate. The cage seemed to whisper what had been held and what had been freed. I backed away slowly. Every instinct screamed to leave. The desert waited silently, watching, and the cage had only one story to tell. The thing that escaped was still out there. The sun dipped low, strange shadows stretching across the desert. The eclipse began. The world turned quiet, unnaturally so. The wind stopped. Even the air seemed suspended. The desert held its breath. From the ridge, I saw them, dozens of shapes, hunched and low, moving across the sand. Their eyes glowed faintly in unison. I watched, frozen. The silhouettes did not flee. They crouched, shifted, patient. And then, slowly, their howls rose, rising to meet the shadowed sun. As the eclipse ended, the shapes vanished. The ridge was empty. No trace remained, except the memory. The desert returned to its calm. Indifferent, but the weight lingered. And I knew they had watched me. And waited. The desert night stretched silent and wide. No wind, no insects, only the faint hum of the earth beneath me. Then my phone rang. Impossible. No signal, no tower, nothing. I answered cautiously. A distorted voice came through. Low, wet, guttural. Not human. Growling, rasping, dragging my name across the line. It ended in a sharp howl that echoed across the dunes. I dropped the phone. The sand beneath it shifted faintly, as though something heavy had paced past. I could smell the desert differently now. Musky, damp, patient. I listened. Silence pressed around me. The growl lingered in my chest, vibrating with the air. Alive, waiting. The desert returned to stillness. But I knew the voice would find me again, patient, unseen, crouched. Maps showed a town ahead. I drove, following the outline of streets barely visible under sand. Buildings should have risen, roofs and signs catching the sun. Nothing, only scattered foundations, bleached stone and sand. In the center, a carving caught my eye. A wolf-headed figure, jagged teeth broken, eyes staring. I could feel it following me as I stepped closer. The wind whispered through empty streets. The air smelled faintly of dust and fur. No sound, no movement, yet the town felt alive. Patient, watching. I walked among the ruins. The stone carvings' eyes glinted in the pale light. I felt something crouched in the shadows, just beyond the edges of vision. The town had vanished, but its watchers remained. I met a hiker on the trail. His face seemed wrong. Too sharp, too stretched, as if carved from shadow. He warned me, don't travel after dark. I nodded, unsure if I understood. He vanished moments later. In his place were claw marks in sand. Long, jagged, circling. Impossible to ignore. I walked on, every step measured, every shadow heavy. The desert held patience here. And something crouched, waiting just beyond the horizon. One night, all sound vanished. The wind stopped. Insects muted. Even my own breath seemed swallowed by the desert. In that silence, I felt it, slow, deliberate steps across sand. Crouched, patient. Closer. I could not see it, yet I could feel its weight, the musky scent of fur, damp earth, pressing against the air. I stayed still. The desert stretched endless, quiet, indifferent, but the presence circled, waiting, always waiting. The final night, I climbed a mesa. The full moon rose, pale and swollen, brushing sand and rocks in silver light. From the cliffs below, shapes emerged, dozens, crouched on all fours, moving like shadows across the stone. Eyes glowed in unison green gold, staring directly at me. I froze. The desert stretched silent, except for the low hum of the wind through rocks. Their howls began, rising, harmonizing with the moonlight, long, broken, perfect in their wildness. I realized they weren't just watching. They were calling me to join them. The desert around me pulsed with their presence, patient and alive. I climbed slowly, knowing there was no escape. The shapes below shifted, crouched, unyielding. The scent of fur, earth, and something older filled the air. I reached the peak. The moonlight fell across the desert in a silver wash. The shapes howled again. The sound pressed against my chest, vibrating through my bones. I understood. I was part of this desert now, part of its patience, its waiting, its silence. I stepped down, and they accepted me. The desert was vast, indifferent, eternal, and I was no longer alone.